Really, NBA GMs? Really? Ja Morant doesn't get a single vote for best point guard in the National Basketball Association? Not one? Some of you voted for Trae Young, Chris Paul, Weekend at Bernie's Chris Paul. This is ridiculous. I am infuriated. Damichael, I'm sorry. We got to get going on this and start with how Ja Morant not being voted. Not even one vote for best in the NBA. Be better, NBA GMs. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. You can find Locked On Grizzlies wherever you find podcasts. We're available on all different podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Check us out, subscribe, rate, do all of those things. Damichael Cole, I am angry. I am very upset. I'm Damichael. I'm telling you now, at least for this first segment, I'm going to be very upset, and I need you to be the cool hand Luke and calm me down because this is ridiculous.
I'll operate as that other side of the pillow during this segment, but I mean, I don't think you're the only one feeling this way, Joe. I think a lot of
I know Ja Morant feels this way. I know that.
Oh, we'll get to him. He's gonna have something to say later on this week. Can't wait to see what actually he says about this. But a little surprising, right? Not that he wasn't voted the best point guard. Yeah, Steph Curry just won a championship. We can see that.
Even Luka Doncic, Damichael. Even Luka, who he's a giant point guard, but in terms of the technical definition, sure, he plays the point guard position. Even if you wanted to say Luka, Damichael, I'd be okay with that.
But it's the other guys that got the vote.
I got it. I'm going to pull it up in front of me, and this is from the annual NBA GM survey that they do. Thank you, and it's unbelievable to me. I'm infuriated. I am belligerent with my anger. I want to say that third place was Chris Paul. Chris Paul? Are we watching a different game of basketball? You would rather, in the NBA today, in the year of our Lord, 2022, you're telling me that somebody would rather have Chris Paul as the best point guard in the NBA than Ja Morant? That's absurd. Did we not watch the playoffs? Did we not see what occurred in Game 7 of that series? It's crazy. Ja Morant is the hottest thing going in the NBA right now. He is so hot right now. He's the hottest club in New York City, as Stefan would say on SNL. It is insane to me that somebody, 10% of somebody's, that's 10%, 30 NBA GMs, that's 3. I'm not a math major, but I roughly, even if it's just that many, dude, Ja Morant is right there. Did you forget he exists?
It's really surprising. And not just him. You had, I believe, Trae Young was the other guy who Trae Young got the 3%, and then 10% went to Chris Paul.
Yeah, so 13 total percent.
So these guys got 4 of the total votes in this conversation. And man, I don't get it. I thought Ja's this past season really elevated himself. I mean, we're talking about a all-star game starter. And okay, that's one season, but we're talking about the greatest paint scoring season by a point guard in the history.
Second team all NBA, Damichael. I know you know all these things. I'm preaching to the choir, but what? Trae Young? And for them at the NBA GM level to objectively, and they're paid for this, and they're paid very well, Damichael. I know you know that. They make a heck of a lot more money than me. I can't speak for you. You do a lot of good job over at the Commercial Appeal. Maybe you are doing phenomenal over there, and that's well-deserved. They make a lot more money than me. I can clearly see. I have eyes. I have the capacity to take in light and process it in my brain and know that Ja Morant is better than both Chris Paul and Trae Young, especially Chris Paul. Maybe you want to make an argument for Trae Young. Maybe in the weirdest semblances of your memory, you can see a world where Trae Young is better than Ja Morant. Excuse me, I'm so angry. I'm losing my voice. Chris Paul, at this stage of his career, you're going off of what he's already banked. You're going off of not what he was last season, but what he means to the NBA. He's the point guard. He can do whatever he wants in the mid-range. He's still a very good basketball player. I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying that Ja Morant is better. And I understand how surveys work. All you people on Twitter and in the comments that are going, oh, Joe doesn't understand how surveys work. I get it, okay? You have one vote. You know who my vote would have been? Steph Curry. Steph Curry would have been my vote. And I am, after being retweeted by Ja Morant, we're best friends essentially now, okay? So we're tight. And I think it's crazy that there's not one NBA GM. If you're going to make the mistake of not saying Steph Curry, because I think it's Steph Curry, in my opinion, Luka Doncic, you can make an argument for. If you're going to make the mistake of not saying one of those two, how in the world do you land on Chris Paul and not Ja Morant?
Here's my thing, Joe. Here's my thing. It's not, if you look at the full totality of this survey here, it's not the fact that Ja Morant was, a much slighted player. You can tell based on the rest of the survey that the league's GMs, Ja Morant was voted the fastest player in the NBA with the ball, above guys like De'Aaron Fox, Russell Westbrook, and so forth. Mm-hmm. He was voted the most athletic player on the NBA's, GM survey, above players like Zion Williamson, Anthony Edwards, and so forth. He also, received recognition as the most exciting player in the NBA, right behind, I believe it was Stephen Curry. He got votes as well for, one of the toughest players to game plan against. He was outside of the top 5, but he did get votes in that category as well. So clearly GMs understand what Ja Morant brings to the table here. So that's where the surprise comes in for me, Joe. They know what this guy does, but they still say, but we still think Trae Young is better. We think 37-year-old Chris Paul is much better at this point. So, it's interesting. I love the annual GM surveys. I love to see when they're right. I love to see how wrong these guys are.
Super wrong.
And in this case, this is more of that bulletin board material. We saw Jaren Jackson Jr. Have some stuff up in the weight room. We know the Grizzlies like to put stuff up in the weight room in there. This might get added to the list, Joe.
Wherever the dark is that Ja Morant trains in, there's going to be a spotlight shined on this nonsense. I'm just completely bamboozled. I used the word bamboozled on a podcast in the year 2022. It is ridiculous to me that not one GM voted for that dude. And I think you hit on a very important fact, a very important reality. They talked about his athleticism. They talked about his speed. And yet Chris Paul is still put in front of him. I think they don't respect his skill set. And that's a mistake because you have watched a ton of Grizzlies basketball. I've watched almost as much Grizzlies basketball in the last year. Ja Morant has an extremely underrated handle. Ja Morant is very strong in terms of navigating space in the paint. He doesn't just run fast and dunk. This is a guy who has the capacity to read defenses, react off of those reads, make correct decisions. He is not at Chris Paul's level yet because Chris Paul is 14 years older than him. When Ja Morant was born, Chris Paul was trying to sneak, candy into the movie theater with his girlfriend after a date at McDonald's. That's what was happening for those two guys. All right. I just really struggle with the idea of all the accolades and all the votes that he did receive. You're exactly right, Damichael. It tells me that they are undervaluing what Ja Morant is as a basketball player. And I think that's the part that Ja is going to latch onto in terms of bulletin board material. Oh, you think that I'm not that dude? I can show you I'm that dude. And we've talked about him developing a mid-range jumper. We've talked about him continuing to show defensive growth. You mentioned that in the show on Monday night, the one that recapped their win in the preseason there at home, the first game that Ja played in. So I think that we're going to see a renewed vigor around Ja Morant in and around how he is going to approach this, because he's not going to take kindly to it, I can assure you. It is going to be not necessarily something that he struggles with in terms of it's going to make him lose sleep, but he's going to point it out after he drops 50 and 10 on the Suns here the first time that they see those guys on the schedule. I'm not sure how you would handle this, Damichael, but I would choose more than 50 million points for Ja Morant against the Phoenix Suns. Not really more than, of course, but more than 26.5 for Ja. And then if you're looking at the opening week of the season, maybe you think LeBron James is going to have a great season and he's going to really thrive early. He's going to get more than 7.5 rebounds in a certain game. Kevin Durant is going to have less than 6.5 assists. Steph Curry, more than 3.5 rebound points made, or 3 points made. Excuse me. You can do all that over at Prize Picks. I love the format of Prize Picks. It's extremely easy to play. I personally have some selections going for the more than for Ja because of the inspiration from all of this happening. I haven't won much yet, obviously because the games haven't started, but I'm fairly confident that over at Prize Picks, I'm going to have some success. Here's how it works. You can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you against the projections. This includes NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, pretty much any way that you could make a more than or less than selection, you can play. Even cricket and Euro basketball. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. It's safe, fast in terms of withdrawals, and it is currently operational in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Obviously, there was more to this survey, Damichael, than just me yelling belligerently about Ja Morant. What were some other things that jumped out at you that were Grizzlies specific when it comes to the NBA GM survey?
Well, there was some good, too. There actually was some good from this. And one of those things was one of the team accolades that the Grizzlies garnered. The Grizzlies were voted the second best young core in the NBA. The question was, who has the best young core in the NBA? I believe the Cleveland Cavaliers received 41% of the votes, and the Grizzlies right behind them at 38%, which I think is, a sign that, again, the GMs not only respect Ja Morant and what he brings to the table, but Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, Zaire Williams, and so forth with the, rookie first-round picks, Kenneth Lofton Jr., Kennedy Chandler, etc. I think that's just a sign that, this young team in the Grizzlies, I think that's how they made, their identity last season. Everyone knew them as this young team that plays so freely and things like that. But I think it was a cool thing seeing them, in the Western Conference. You have a lot of really good young cores, and the Grizzlies sitting at the top, I think bodes well, not for the now, but for the long term as well. We know Ja's locked up long term. We know Jaren's locked up. Hint, Desmond Bane will be very soon. So you factor in all that, Joe. I think they're in a good spot. And there's an argument can be made that they're a better young core than that team in Cleveland as well. But those are probably your top two right now.
And the NBA GMs clearly valued the Donovan Mitchell trade. One of the options from the survey, which one player acquisition will make the biggest impact? Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland, 59%. And that was dominant ahead of Rudy Gobert with Minnesota at 31%. So a majority of NBA GMs saw the Mitchell deal as the major shift in the NBA. So it makes sense to maybe, again, because I think Mitchell, I want to say is 25. I don't have it in front of me. He's still relatively young for the NBA. So that probably turns some heads for them. My biggest surprise in terms of not necessarily what the team is capable of, but in terms of how the team is being viewed by opposing general managers. Which team's level of success this season is the toughest to predict? And I know that we'll talk about where they're set in the NBA GM survey in the last segment. The Grizzlies were third at 14% of NBA GMs not really being able to get a read on the team. The Brooklyn Nets finished first because they should at 32%. The Los Angeles Lakers, again, because they should, finished in second. But among the
those were the
uncrazy
two teams too that were
right.
projected to make the finals by the same GMs last season. So now that they picked them to go to the finals last year, now they see both of them basically flunked out last year. Like, look, we don't know what to expect from them now. I thought that was pretty funny.
They're not getting burned this time around, Damichael, which I can appreciate that. But among the NBA teams' non-crazy division, the Grizzlies at 14% were first, if you're not counting the Nets or Lakers. So opposing teams are really not sure what to make of the Memphis offseason because, again, traditionally speaking, they didn't do what a contender does. They got younger. They added a lot of young talent. They traded away a valuable, again, people like to devalue him, but he was good, DeAnthony Melton. In fact, DeAnthony Melton on that acquisition list, I want to say he was fourth.
Yeah, he was on the list.
Yeah, he was on the list for the best acquisitions in the offseason, or the most underrated player acquisition. DeAnthony Melton of Philadelphia, 10%. So NBA GMs don't undervalue DeAnthony Melton. I think some members of the fan base in Memphis with the Grizzlies do. But I was intrigued, Damichael, by how teams are struggling to make out what Memphis is doing and how that's going to connect to their regular season success ahead of the upcoming campaign.
Yeah, you hit it, Joe. Because the problem is the Grizzlies, they do it their way. The Grizzlies don't do it the traditional, what has
very unique
traditional NBA way these days, which is when you get close, you go out and you sign or trade for some big superstar to put the icing on the cake. But the Grizzlies are saying, no, we're going to sit back. We believe in, the organic process, here that they're rebuilding. And you saw, some of that kind of play out with Boston, this past season, just constantly, punching at the door and finally getting over the hump. We've seen it, in a way play out with Golden State, as their core kind of formed together and have, now been one of the, biggest on one of the best runs we've ever seen, in the NBA. But with the Grizzlies, they haven't signed a free agent since I believe 2019. It's 2022. You know what I was doing in 2019? I was walking across the stage at University of Tennessee. So it's been a while. It's been a while since they signed that free agent who was, Tyus Jones. But outside of that, the Grizzlies have really focused in on, a couple trades here and there, Steven Adams, trading away DeAnthony Melton and things like that. It's their way. They have their own way of doing this. And from a traditional GM standpoint, I can understand why these guys say, hey, we don't know about, the Grizzlies this year. And it's not just because of the Grizzlies. We'll be remiss if we didn't mention that a couple of the teams that are projected to finish in front of the Grizzlies were the Clippers and the Nuggets, who are also two teams who are getting injured players back. The Nuggets already got Jamal Murray back, got his first preseason action and things like that. Michael Porter Jr. as well should be in the fold with them this upcoming season. And then, with the Clippers, a lot of talk about, Kawhi Leonard being back, acquiring John Wall to go with, Paul George and the whole group over there. So I feel like it's more about these other teams get healthy and adding on, and GM saying, oh, the Grizzlies, they didn't do much to hold the fort there. Where in reality, Zach Kleiman has said time and time again, they trust the guys they have in the locker room. I remember out in Las Vegas, I asked him, what type of moves would the team potentially make? Would they be involved in when Jaren Jackson Jr. now being injured? And he said, look, the Grizzlies are going to make some calls. They would be making calls. They would be actively out there, seeing what's available and what makes sense. But at the end of the day, they like what they have. And the Grizzlies held fort again. So far, it looks like the right decision. Santi Aldama, through 2 preseason games, has played really good basketball. So there is a trust in the rebuild, in the identity, in, the player development system here in Memphis.
As well, there should be. And one last thing on that, one of the reasons for that is Taylor Jenkins, who also got some love in the survey in terms of receiving votes.
Did he get some love?
He did. He got some receiving votes for best head coach in the NBA.
Joe, I thought he should have been higher, but that's neither here nor there as well.
Well, maybe we disagree a little bit for once. I like that. I would say manager, motivator of people, Willie Green of New Orleans being in front of Taylor Jenkins maybe is a little bit out there. But again, that would put him like at 7th in the NBA. He is widely considered based off my reading of these results. And again, you can go to NBA.com, check out the NBA GM survey. I'd say they consider him, he's somebody that runs or received votes, I should say, for running both the best offensive and defensive schemes. For example, Kerr of Golden State led the best offense, but then defensively, if I'm reading this correctly, he didn't get any votes. It was Eric Spoelstra number 1, but Kerr didn't even receive votes for running the best defensive scheme. So that puts, Chris Finch is 2nd in terms of running the best offense. He didn't get any defensive votes. So if you're looking for guys that got votes in both offense and defense, Nick Nurse is the first name that I'm picking up on. And then after that, I want to say it's Taylor Jenkins. It is Taylor Jenkins and Monty Williams. So that's an impressive list in and of itself, even though he wasn't top 5 in either of those. He's one of a few guys to get votes for both best offense and best defense. So his schemes are sound. Another thing that is sound, at least I believe it is the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview. Again, thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. But starting October 10th, you can check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview. It's a 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network, as well as Odyssey, are all combining into one Ultimate NBA Preview. Starting October 10th, search for Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. When we come back, we're going to finish out the show where the Grizzlies are projected to wind up in the Western Conference. Might spark some debate. Damichael and I will tackle that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, we're talking the NBA GM survey. And to close up shop here, predictions. First seed in the Western Conference, the Los Angeles Clippers. You mentioned in the prior segment how they're getting healthier. Golden State, defending champions, 2 seed. Makes total sense. The Phoenix Suns, maybe a bit lofty in terms of their current implosion, as long as they're not playing the 36ers every night.
36ers, how about them, right?
As long as they're not playing them every night, maybe they got a shot. That could happen to anyone. I'm not going to overanalyze a preseason game in that way. But they're picked to be 3rd in the West. Denver, Jokic, obviously, the reigning 2-time now, I believe, back-to-back MVP. And they get Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray back. Folks expect Denver to be better. There are the Memphis Grizzlies sitting at 5th. And they're the only other team that got more than 1% of the vote in terms of being, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. 14% of NBA GMs expect them to be 3rd. 17% said 4th. I'm intrigued by this, Damichael, because I think that this is realistic. And this isn't going to make Grizzlies fans happy. But if you look at the Clippers and Nuggets getting healthy, you assume that the Warriors and the Suns are still good at what they do. You have the Grizzlies, again, in theory, stepping back a little bit in terms of no longer having Melton and Anderson, replacing them with rookies, at least in the traditional sense, as you mentioned, Damichael. Memphis dropping from 2nd to 5th, still out of the play-in, still one of the top 10 or so teams in the NBA. That's not something that should shock folks to see. But again, the Grizzlies haven't really been concerned about what the outside world thinks of them. They are very content to march to the beat of their own drum.
Yeah, 5th seed, right? So we saw the Grizzlies have the number 2 seed last year. GMs are saying they project this team to fall to the 5th seed. But Joe, you kind of said it earlier, and I don't know if it's really a fall. It's just, it's how the dominoes, are just, it's how the dominoes are falling more than anything in the Western Conference. You look at last season, for example, the Grizzlies, if you remember at the beginning of March, the Grizzlies and Golden State were on a collision course for a huge game at the end of the month there in March that would heavily determine who could be the number 2 seed. Throughout the month of March, a couple injuries happened on the Golden State side, mainly Steph Curry, and Golden State basically conceded, the number 2 seed to the Grizzlies. And, they basically had this mentality of, we just want to be fully healthy when the postseason starts. Worked out well for them. But that was the Golden State mentality, where the Grizzlies kept their foot on the gas pedal, as they should have, and, finished with one of the best records in franchise history, tied the best record in franchise history, second best record in the NBA. So basically, last season, a healthy Golden State team probably gets the 2 seed or finishes very, very close to where, the Memphis Grizzlies did. So once you factor that in, and then these 2 teams who are going to get healthy, it makes sense. It makes sense. I think there's still an argument, that could be made, especially on the Clippers side. The Nuggets with Jamal Murray have been very proven. This was a top 2 seed, top 3 seed, with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic playing together. And now when Murray was hurt, they did a really good job of building the pieces around, going to get guys like Aaron Gordon and players like that, and, drafting a guy like Bones Highland, who they value really high over there. So they've done a real good job of putting better pieces around that team, which should be interesting as well. The Clippers, a lot of people say they've been a point guard away. I watched one of their preseason games, and Reggie Jackson still starting over John Wall. So we'll see how that plays out over the course of time. But if that's the lineup that they're going to go with, then this is the same Clippers team, that the Utah Jazz that beat the Utah Jazz, but the year before that they lost to the Nuggets. So I'm not as high on the Clippers in that regard. I do think the Clippers have a really good chance at winning the Western Conference, but in terms of the projections, I think we need to see more from the Clippers side, and that's where I feel like the Grizzlies got slighted a little bit. That's where the slight comes in from each other. This is a team that's very proven, 56 wins last season. All your top players are back, and we see where GMs value DeAnthony Melton, but overall, I think the Grizzlies' net gain, net loss isn't much. And from the team I saw in Orlando, it looks like they're going to have a couple things to say.
I think so. And a good way to tie this all up here at the end, Damichael, is to really kind of appreciate, you said something with the Clippers and wanting to see it. It aligns with Chris Paul being voted in front of Ja Morant because people have seen Chris Paul do these things and they just still think Chris Paul, he's really good at basketball. Kawhi Leonard, boom, still really good at basketball. Paul George, boom, still really good at basketball. You haven't seen it fully executed the way that everybody just assumed it would be executed. They don't play basketball games on paper, right? You got to roll the ball out. You got to put it through the hoop and see who does it the most. I hear you on that, and I think that's a really fair point. The Grizzlies have shown it, just not in a way that the NBA is accustomed to. And I think that because they're not really able to figure out what the Grizzlies are, they go with what they know. They know Paul George. They know Kawhi Leonard. They know in theory those guys should be the class of the West if they are healthy and if they are clicking. Ty Lue got some votes in the coaching categories. He's one of the better coaches in the NBA. He deserves credit for that as well. I'm with you on the Clippers. I think that, again, if you're picking them to win the West, that makes total sense, at least to get to the Western Conference Finals. But that's why you play the games. And the Grizzlies have shown more recently that they're willing to value the regular season, whereas teams like the Warriors and Clippers have not. So maybe the Clippers are the 3 or 4 seed and make it to the title, just like Golden State made it as the 3 seed last year. That could happen. But Memphis is going to, wherever they can, keep that pedal to the metal, as you said, and that's going to help a younger team in terms of being competitive. Damichael, what do we have cooking? You and I have talked a little bit about this, but maybe just to give people a reason to tune back in next time. What do we got cooking up for our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies?
we've seen a lot of players play for the Grizzlies, throughout these couple preseason games. We saw Kenneth Lofton Jr., get some praise in that first game. Saw a lot of the rookies get a lot of playing time. Then in the second game, we saw a lot of the big boys come back, right? Tyus Jones, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, Brandon Clark, so forth. So there's one player who actually started a playoff game last season, has not played a minute in the preseason yet. We're going to talk about his chances of making the roster. I think Locked On Grizzlies fans should tune in tomorrow. We have some intel there as well from some things that Taylor Jenkins has said about this player and so forth. But there's a player who started playoff games last season, has not played a preseason minute yet, and he's healthy. Let me throw it out there. He's healthy. So we're not talking about Jaren Jackson Jr., but we got that for you tomorrow on Locked On Grizzlies. So be sure to tune into that.
I'd be nervous, and I'd also be excited to tune into our next episode. Thank you, Damichael, for that. And thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every day. Now go make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Basketball, where Josh Lloyd, friend of Locked On Grizzlies, hosts the #1 daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. It is free and available wherever you get podcasts. For my co-host, the wonderful Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal, I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Locked On Grizzlies.